The call came at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning. "Ms. Carter," a man's voice asked. "Speaking." There was a long pause before he continued. "This is Evan, the videographer from your father's retirement banquet." I smiled automatically. "Oh, great, is the final video finished?" "No." His answer came so quickly that it erased the smile from my face. "I need you to come to my studio." "What happened?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Please don't tell your dad." My fingers tightened around the phone. Why would I hide this from him? I can't explain over the phone. Did something happen to the footage? I noticed something while editing. His voice dropped even lower. Something disturbing. My heartbeat quickened. "What kind of disturbing?" "I'm asking you to trust me." I stood from my desk without realizing it. "When?" "As soon as you can." I grabbed my keys. "If this is some kind of technical issue." "It isn't." Silence. Then he added the sentence that stayed with me the entire drive across town. "After what I saw, I don't think your father should know until you see it first." Evan's editing studio occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse downtown. Usually the place felt creative and welcoming, filled with framed wedding photos and corporate event posters. That morning, it felt strangely quiet. He opened the door before I even knocked. "You came. You sounded terrified." "I've barely slept." His editing monitors were already running. My father's retirement banquet filled the largest screen. Bright lights, elegant decorations, coworkers raising champagne glasses, 40 years of loyal service celebrated with speeches, laughter, and applause. Exactly the night we all remembered. Evan motioned toward a chair. "I've edited hundreds of events," he said. "Weddings, charity galas, retirement parties. Most people never watch the raw footage." "I don't understand." "I do." He clicked the timeline backward. I noticed something that wasn't supposed to be in frame. The footage played. Dad laughed with coworkers near the ballroom entrance, while guests gathered for the speeches. Victor Hale appeared beside him. That wasn't unusual. Victor had worked with my father for almost 30 years. They'd built the investment consulting firm together. If Dad trusted anyone outside our family, it was Victor. The video continued. Victor leaned close and said something. Dad nodded. Then the two of them quietly slipped away from the ballroom together. "They were probably checking the schedule," I said. "So I thought." Evan rewound the clip. Again. And again. I kept asking myself why this bothered me. He advanced frame by frame until the two men disappeared through a side hallway. I almost deleted this angle because the camera operator was repositioning. He clicked another file. This camera accidentally kept recording. A different angle appeared, behind the ballroom, away from the speeches and guests. There was my father. Victor stood beside him. No one else seemed to notice they had left. "They were only gone for a minute," I said. "Watch carefully." The clip slowed to half speed. Victor placed a folder into my father's hands. Dad opened it without hesitation. "He handled all of Dad's retirement investments," I said. "That doesn't seem strange." "I know." Evan paused the video. I thought the same thing. He zoomed into the ballroom windows behind them. At first all I saw was glass reflecting chandeliers. "What am I looking at?" "The reflection." He enhanced the image. The reflection sharpened. Another man stepped into view behind my father. Someone I hadn't even realized was standing there. The man reached forward and handed my father a second document. Not openly. Not where anyone inside the ballroom could have seen. My breath caught. "Who is that?" Evan looked at me without answering. "I've watched this clip at least 50 times, he said quietly. And every time. He pressed play again. I noticed something even worse. I stared at the frozen frame until my eyes began to blur. "Play it again," I said. Evan didn't argue. He dragged the timeline back a few seconds and let it run at normal speed. From the ballroom's perspective, nothing looked unusual. Guests laughed. Waiters carried trays of champagne. My father's retirement slideshow was beginning to play on the projector. But the roaming camera, forgotten by its operator for less than 2 minutes, had captured an entirely different story. Victor guided my father farther down the hallway, away from the ballroom entrance. The unidentified man remained just outside the camera's main focus, his face partially hidden as he held what looked like an identical leather folder. "They're almost the same," I murmured. "The folders?" Evan asked. I nodded. Same color, same size. And nobody would have questioned it. The realization settled over us. On the night itself, every guest had been focused on celebrating my father's 40 years with the company. No one had been watching a hallway. Evan switched to another raw clip. "This camera belonged to my assistant," he explained. "He was walking toward the stage when he accidentally recorded behind the ballroom." The angle wasn't perfect, but it revealed another brief glimpse of Victor steering my father away from approaching coworkers. Twice, people tried to greet Dad. Twice, Victor intercepted them with a smile. "We'll be right back," he told one manager cheerfully. "Just finishing retirement paperwork." Everyone accepted the explanation, including me. The memory hit me with uncomfortable clarity. That night, I'd noticed Dad disappearing for a few minutes. I'd even started walking toward the hallway. Before I reached them, Victor had stepped into my path wearing his usual confident smile. "Bernice," he'd said warmly, "your father finally agreed to let me organize everything. No more paperwork tonight." I just wanted to make sure he wasn't signing anything important. Victor laughed. "You're a compliance analyst. You'd audit your own birthday party if someone let you." Several nearby coworkers chuckled. I remembered forcing a smile, even though something about the exchange had bothered me. "Dad can review everything tomorrow," I'd replied. "He already has," Victor assured me, "weeks ago." My father had appeared beside him then, smiling proudly. "Stop worrying," Dad had told me. "Victor's taking care of it." I hadn't pushed any further. Looking back now, I hated myself for that. Evan interrupted my thoughts. "There's more." He opened an enhanced version of the roaming camera footage. This time, the software stabilized the image and brightened the shadows. Victor stayed close enough to my father that he subtly blocked anyone else's approach. The unidentified man waited several feet behind them, carrying the second folder with both hands. Then came something I hadn't noticed before. As my father signed one page, Victor glanced over his shoulder, not at Dad, but at the other man. A quick nod. The man immediately stepped forward. Neither of them spoke loudly enough for the original recording to capture clearly. Evan clicked another file. I sent the audio through restoration software. Static filled the speakers. Footsteps. Muffled applause from inside the ballroom. Then, "He'll never notice after tonight." The sentence was faint, distorted, impossible to identify. I looked at Evan. Was that Victor? I honestly don't know. Can you isolate the voice? I'm still trying. Silence settled over the room. If that sentence meant what I thought it meant, someone had planned something long before the banquet ever started. I rubbed my forehead. There has to be another angle. Evan slowly nodded. There is. He reached toward another hard drive. I haven't shown you the hallway camera yet. He looked directly at me before opening the file. Bernice, you're not ready for what that camera recorded. Evan plugged in another drive and waited for the file to load. This isn't my footage, he said. It's from the banquet hall's hallway security camera. I requested it after noticing the timing didn't line up. The screen flickered to life. A grainy, overhead view showed the hallway outside the private conference room adjacent to the ballroom. A timestamp glowed in the corner. 7:42, 16 p.m. There, Evan said. Victor and my father entered the conference room together. The door closed. No audio, I asked. He shook his head. Just video. We watched the empty hallway in silence. 23 seconds later, another man appeared carrying a leather folder identical to the one I'd seen in the roaming camera footage. He glanced both ways before entering the same room. My stomach tightened. Who is he? I've been trying to identify him. The timestamp continued. At 7:44:02, the unidentified man walked out. But something had changed. The folder he carried now had a small silver binder clip attached to its corner. It didn't have that before, I whispered. Evan nodded. Keep watching. Only 12 seconds later, Victor emerged. He smiled at someone off camera before straightening his jacket. Then he walked away, carrying a leather folder. I leaned toward the monitor. Pause it. Evan froze the frame. Victor's folder had no silver binder clip. I looked back at the earlier image. The unidentified man had entered without a clip and left with one. Victor had entered with one folder and exited holding another. The exchange had taken less than 20 seconds. No one inside the ballroom would have noticed. Everyone had been applauding my father's retirement speech. I need to know exactly what happened in that room, I said. So do I. I left the studio carrying copies of every file Evan had recovered. Instead of driving home, I headed to my father's house. He wasn't there. He'd gone golfing with former coworkers. For the first time in my life, I was relieved. His filing cabinet sat exactly where it always had in his home office. He'd never hidden financial paperwork from me. In fact, he'd often asked me to explain legal language before signing anything important. I opened the retirement folder we'd reviewed together 3 weeks before the banquet. Everything looked familiar. The investment allocations, the beneficiary forms, the withdrawal schedule. Then I opened the folder he'd brought home after the retirement banquet. At first glance, nothing seemed different. The signatures matched. The dates matched. Even the company letterhead appeared identical. But line by line, page by page, subtle differences emerged. Paragraphs had changed. Account authority clauses had been rewritten. Language that originally required my father's direct approval had been replaced with broad management authority. Someone had rewritten the legal control of his retirement assets without changing the signature page. My pulse quickened. I placed both versions side by side across the desk. The signature pages were identical. The documents before those signatures were not. Someone hadn't forged my father's name. Someone had made him sign something entirely different. The next morning, I quietly contacted 2 executives who had attended the banquet. I know this sounds strange, I began, but do you remember Dad leaving the ballroom before the speeches? The first executive laughed softly. Victor said they were wrapping up retirement paperwork. Did you actually see the paperwork? No. The second executive remembered something different. I tried to congratulate your father, she said. Victor stopped me. What did he say? Give us just another minute, he sounded, unusually firm. Neither of them thought anything was suspicious at the time. Why would they? Victor Hale had spent decades earning everyone's trust. His reputation had protected him better than any locked door ever could. That afternoon, I returned to my father's office. I opened the altered retirement packet one more time. There was one page I hadn't examined closely. The final authorization. I unfolded it carefully. My father's unmistakable signature stretched across the bottom. Above it was a clause granting Victor Hale discretionary control over nearly every retirement investment my father owned. For several long seconds, I couldn't breathe. The first person I called wasn't the police. It was an attorney. Not because I doubted what I had found, but because I knew accusations without proof could destroy innocent people just as quickly as guilty ones. "I need someone to tell me I'm wrong," I said after introducing myself. The attorney, Melissa Grant, listened without interrupting as I explained the banquet, the footage, the altered documents, and the clause giving Victor control over my father's retirement investments. "Can you bring me everything?" she asked. "Today." "Immediately." An hour later, we sat across from each other in a quiet conference room. Melissa spread both retirement packets across the table. She compared them page by page, occasionally placing colored tabs along the edges. After nearly 20 minutes, she looked up. The signatures appeared genuine. I let out a slow breath. So my father really signed them. He signed something. She slid the 2 packets toward me. "But these aren't the same documents." She pointed to tiny formatting differences. "This page uses different spacing." Another tab. "This paragraph shifts the margins." Another. "The page numbering is inconsistent." I frowned. I would have never noticed that. Most people wouldn't. She leaned back. "If someone removed the pages before the signature sheet and replaced them afterward, the signature itself would remain authentic." I stared at the paperwork. So they didn't fake his name. They may not have needed to. Melissa reached for the flash drive Evan had given me. "I'd like to see the video." We watched every clip in silence. The roaming camera. The hallway footage. The reflected exchange in the ballroom window. The partially restored audio. When the recording ended, Melissa folded her hands. "This is stronger than you probably realize." "You think so?" Individually, each clip raises questions. She tapped the table. Together, they establish a sequence. She replayed the hallway recording. Your father enters. Click. The unidentified man enters carrying one folder. Click. He leaves carrying a different one. Click. Victor exits with yet another folder. She paused the frame. Now compare that to the roaming camera. Victor's subtle nod. The unidentified man's immediate movement. The second folder. Then the restored audio. He'll never notice after tonight. Melissa didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, she said quietly, the footage doesn't prove exactly what was said. But it proves coordinated behavior. Everything that had seemed unrelated now connected into one continuous chain. Not one dramatic mistake. A carefully timed series of ordinary actions. There's one thing you need to do immediately, Melissa said. What? Freeze every retirement transfer connected to these accounts. My father doesn't even know. If the assets move before this is investigated, recovering them becomes much harder. Within the hour, emergency paperwork was filed requesting a temporary freeze while the documents were examined. It was the first irreversible step. There was no turning back now. 2 days passed. Then Victor called. I let it ring. He called again. And again. When I still didn't answer, the text messages began. Victor, asterisk heard you've been asking questions. A few minutes later. Victor, asterisk is something wrong. By evening. Victor, asterisk you could have just called me. The next morning, an old family friend phoned. Victor mentioned you've been reviewing the retirement footage, he said casually. Everything okay? I kept my answer short. We're verifying some paperwork. The line went quiet. Word was spreading. Victor knew someone was looking. His messages became more frequent. Less friendly. More urgent. He wasn't asking how my father was anymore. He wanted to know what I knew. That afternoon, My phone vibrated again. Not Victor. Melissa. I've received the forensic examiner's preliminary findings, she said. Already. There was enough evidence to expedite the review. My heart pounded. Can you tell me now? I'd rather you read the report yourself. Seconds later, an email notification appeared on my screen. Forensic document examination, preliminary findings. My finger hovered over the attachment. Everything depended on what was inside. My hands were unsteady as I opened the report. Melissa waited quietly across the conference table while I read the first page. The conclusion was direct. The signature pages were authentic. I looked up. So my father really did sign them. Melissa nodded. Keep reading. The next section explained what the examiner had found. The signature sheets matched the originals my father had reviewed before the banquet. The pages attached to those signature sheets did not. Paper fibers, staple impressions, print alignment, and microscopic toner patterns all showed the same thing. The documents had been assembled from different sets of pages. Someone had substituted the contents after my father reviewed the retirement packet, but before it was finalized. I closed my eyes. Victor hadn't tricked my father into signing a completely different packet. He had done something even more calculated. He had preserved the genuine signature while changing the agreement it approved. Melissa spread everything across the table one final time. The report proves the documents were altered. She pointed toward the monitor. The footage explains when. Evan had synchronized every recording down to the second. The ballroom camera. The roaming camera. The hallway security footage. Each timestamp aligned perfectly. At 7:42, Victor led my father into the conference room. Seconds later, the unidentified financial associate entered carrying one folder. He left with another. Victor emerged carrying the folder that eventually became my father's final retirement packet. The restored audio was never treated as proof by itself. Instead, it fit the timeline created by everything else. Every reflection in the ballroom window. Every hallway movement. Every exchanged folder. Every timestamp. None of it looked extraordinary alone. Together, it formed one complete picture. There had never been an affair. There had never been a family secret. The disturbing thing hidden in my father's retirement footage was something far worse. His closest friend had turned a celebration into the perfect opportunity for financial fraud. Telling my father was the hardest conversation of my life. He sat quietly at his dining room table while I placed the 2 retirement packets in front of him. "What is all this?" he asked. "I need you to watch something first." We drove to Evan's studio together. Not once during the drive did I mention Victor's name. Evan replayed the synchronized footage without speaking. My father smiled at first. He recognized familiar coworkers, friends, old clients. Then he watched himself disappear into the hallway with Victor. Frame by frame. Reflection by reflection. Folder by folder. When the conference room sequence ended, he didn't say anything. Evan played the hallway footage next. Then the document comparison. Finally, Melissa explained the forensic findings. The room fell silent. Dad leaned forward with both elbows on his knees. "I remember signing those pages," he whispered. I remember Victor saying we'd already reviewed everything. His voice broke. "I never imagined." He couldn't finish the sentence. For 40 years, Victor had been more than a business partner. He had been the best man at my parents' wedding. He came to every Thanksgiving dinner. He attended every birthday. When my mother passed away years earlier, Victor had stood beside our family through the funeral. That history made the betrayal harder to understand. Not easier. Dad wasn't grieving the money. He was grieving the man he thought he'd known. After a long silence, he turned toward me. "You tried to stop me that night." I nodded. I should have listened. The temporary freeze on the retirement accounts prevented the transfers from being completed. Investigators subpoenaed company records, email correspondence, and financial logs. Once the forensic report was added to the synchronized video timeline, the sequence became impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Victor and the financial associate had coordinated the document exchange during the banquet. The altered authority clause would have allowed Victor to manage nearly all of my father's retirement assets without meaningful oversight. The scheme failed because one roaming camera kept recording while its operator repositioned equipment. That forgotten angle became the missing piece. Authorities charged Victor with fraud, forgery-related financial offenses, and conspiracy connected to the altered retirement documents. Several longtime clients immediately withdrew their investments. His firm's board removed him from management. The financial associate also faced criminal charges for participating in the document substitution. The reputation Victor had spent decades building collapsed in a matter of weeks. Not because of rumors, because the evidence spoke for itself. As the investigation became public, people who had attended the banquet kept calling. "I remember Victor keeping everyone away from your father. I thought he was just helping. I should have paid more attention." None of them had intended to help a fraud. They had simply trusted someone who had spent years earning that trust. That realization stayed with me. Sometimes deception doesn't rely on secrecy. Sometimes it succeeds because everyone believes the wrong person deserves unquestioned confidence. Months later, after the legal proceedings had ended and my father's retirement funds had been fully restored, Evan finally completed the retirement film. He invited us to watch the finished version. This time, it showed only what the evening had truly been meant to celebrate. My father's decades of dedication, his coworkers' respect, his family's pride. The manipulated hallway footage was gone. Not erased. Preserved separately as evidence. Dad smiled as the closing montage faded to black. Then he looked at me. "I spent my career thinking my job was protecting this family." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It turns out you were protecting me." For the first time since the investigation began, the weight I'd been carrying finally lifted. I still keep a copy of the raw footage. Not because I want to remember the betrayal, but because it reminds me that the truth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly in the background, until someone is willing to look closely enough to see it.